The heavy man caught her by the collar. He stank of tobacco and whiskey, and his free hand was drawing a long knife out of his belt. Adelaide Thornberry did not scream. She drew the small silver derringer from her sleeve. She put the barrel under his chin, and she fired. But to understand how a Philadelphia governess came to kill a man on a Montana sleigh, we have to go back 6 weeks, to the night 3 riders found her dying in the snow. The snow came down in Montana the way God's own silence falls on a man who has outlived his reasons. Heavy, patient, without pity. Adelaide Thornberry did not see the snow at first. She felt it. A cold weight on her shoulders, soaking through the wool of her traveling coat, through the thin dress beneath, down to skin that had not known true warmth in 6 days. She felt it in her eyelashes where frost had begun to form small crystals that blurred the world into something softer than it was. She felt it in her lungs which burned with every breath, each one a small fire she could not tend. She was 23 years old, and she was going to die on a mountain she had never seen. She did not want to die. That was the cruel part. A week ago on the train out of St. Paul, she had wanted to die, had stared out at the passing prairie and thought, if this train were to jump its rails, I would not mind. Not much. But now here kneeling in snow that was already past her knees, with the last of the October light draining out of the sky like blood from a slow wound, she found that she wanted very badly to live. The leather valise lay in the snow beside her, open from when she had fallen. She could see the corner of her mother's Bible, the one with the cracked spine. She could see a folded stocking. She could see the small cameo brooch her mother had pinned to her own wedding dress in 1858, the one Adelaide had carried in her pocket all the way from Philadelphia like a coin for the ferryman. 6 miles. That was what the station master in Silver Creek had told her when she had asked for a wagon to the Blackwood cabin. 6 miles, miss, up the old logging trail. You cannot miss it. But then he had looked away, and no one had offered a wagon, and no one had offered a horse, and no one had even offered her a cup of coffee before she set out. They had looked at her the way decent people look at a funeral, with pity and with relief that the funeral was not their own. She had walked 3 miles before the snow began. She had walked 2 more before her boots, good city boots made for Philadelphia sidewalks, gave up the fight against Montana mud and Montana ice. Now her feet were blocks of something that was not flesh anymore. Now her breath came in small, white ghosts that hung in the air in front of her face. She tried to stand, could not. Tried again, could not. They left you out here to die, she whispered to herself. Her voice sounded like someone else's voice, thin and far away. Or will you get up? The forest answered with silence. Somewhere not so far, a wolf tested the edge of evening with a single low note. Adelaide heard it and understood what it meant. She understood it the way a woman understands all the small, cold facts at the end of her life. She closed her eyes, and that was when she heard the hooves. 3 riders. She could hear them before she could see them, the soft thunder of horses moving at a careful pace through deep snow, the creak of leather, the blow of an animal's breath. She forced her eyes open. Through the curtain of falling snow, 3 shapes emerged like figures cut out of some old Bible story. Tall on their horses, rifles across their thighs, the lead rider was enormous. He filled the space between the pines as if he had grown up out of the mountain itself. He came closer and she saw his eyes. Amber, not brown, not gold, but the color of whiskey held up to a kerosene lamp. Eyes that had seen things and remembered them. Eyes that fixed on her now, the way a hawk fixes on the one living thing in an empty field. Miss Thornberry, the man said. It was not a question. His voice was low and slow and carried the weight of a Union canteen. She nodded because she could not speak. Her jaw would not move properly. He swung down off the horse in one motion that should not have been graceful on a man his size and was. He crossed to her through the snow. Up close, he was even larger. A bear coat hung from his shoulders, heavy and dark, and before she could think what he meant to do, he had pulled it off his own body and wrapped it around hers. The warmth of him was still inside the fur, It struck her like a blow she had not expected. He lifted her, not gently, not roughly, the way a man lifts a sack of grain he has been trusted with. Her head fell against his shoulder, and she smelled pine smoke and gun oil and a clean, sharp sweat that was nothing like the heavy colognes of Philadelphia men. "The letter lied to you," he said. His breath moved the hair at her temple. "And I am sorry for that. But the storm is coming down fast, and we need to make the cabin before dark. The rest we will speak of later." That was all he said. The other two riders had drawn close. One was nearly as tall, leaner, with hair the color of wheat ready for cutting, and eyes she could not see clearly in the dim. The other was the youngest, broader, through the shoulders somehow, with a hat pulled low and a Winchester held with the easy, unthinking grip of a man born to it. That one did not look at her at all. He was looking at the tree line, the ridge of the slope above. His head moved in small, careful arcs, and she realized, even in her half-frozen state, that he was watching for something. The lean one, the middle one, dismounted and took her valise up out of the snow without comment. He closed it with great care, as if the things inside mattered. The big man set her onto his horse, then mounted behind her, and one arm came around her like a gate closing. "Hold on to the saddle horn, ma'am," he said. "I will not let you fall." They started up the mountain. She did not know then that this was Ezekiel Blackwood. She did not know that the middle one with the wheat hair was Obadiah, called Obi, and the young one who watched the ridges was Rafferty, called Raph. She did not know that she had already ridden past 3 ghosts on this road. One of them was her own. She only knew that she was not going to die tonight, and she did not know yet whether that was a mercy or a postponement. If this is your first time here, friend, pull up a chair. Subscribe to the channel. Every week I bring you a new story out of the old frontier, the kind of story your grandfather might have told if he had lived long enough to learn the ending. And leave a comment tonight. Tell me where you are listening from. I like to know who is around the fire. Now, let me tell you how a letter can lie and how a man can tell the truth. Adelaide Thornberry was not supposed to be in Montana. 6 years ago, she had stood in the parlor of a townhouse on Spruce Street in Philadelphia, wearing a plain gray dress and a lace collar borrowed from a cousin, and had been hired on as governess to the 2 small daughters of Mr. Harlan Ashford. Mr. Ashford was a senior officer at the Third National Bank of Philadelphia. He was a pillar of his church. His wife Eugenie was on the board of the Ladies' Benevolent Society. Their home smelled of beeswax polish and cut flowers. Adelaide was 17 when she took the position. She was 17 because her father and mother, who had come over from Sussex when she was a child, had both died within 10 days of each other in the cholera that took so much of South Philadelphia in the spring of 1878. She had watched her mother go first. She had held her father's hand on the last night and listened to him rattle out his small, final pieces of advice. "Keep your Bible, Adelaide. Keep your word. Marry a man whose eyes do not slide." She had buried them together in a single plot because that was all she could afford, and then she had gone looking for work, and the Ashfords had taken her in. For 6 years, she had taught their daughters French verbs and piano scales and how to hold a teacup. For 6 years, she had been a ghost in their fine rooms, paid quietly, fed adequately, given Sundays off for church. She had believed in a small, hopeful way that this might become a kind of life. It did not. In the February of her 6th year, Mr. Ashford came home drunk. His wife was at a society meeting. The girls were asleep. Adelaide was in the library correcting copybooks by lamplight when she heard him come in. She heard his step on the stair. She heard the small catch in it that meant whiskey. He came into the library and he closed the door behind him. What she remembered afterwards was not the look on his face, which had been a look she did not understand. What she remembered was the weight of the silver candlestick in her hand when she swung it. She did not remember lifting it. She only remembered the dull sound it made against his temple and his grunt, and the way he went down heavily onto the Persian rug. She had run up to her room. She had packed in 10 minutes. By morning, Eugenia Ashford was downstairs weeping into a handkerchief and calling her a Jezebel. By afternoon, Adelaide was on the street with her valise and a letter of reference that said only Miss Thornberry was in our employ from 1878 to 1884. Nothing more. No good words. No mention of 6 years of honest work. In Philadelphia in 1884, a governess without a letter was a governess without a position. A girl without a position was something worse than nothing. Adelaide spent 2 weeks in a boarding house on Race Street, eating less each day, watching her small savings thin like snow on a warm roof. She found the advertisement in the Sunday edition of Harper's Weekly between a notice for patent medicine and a notice for a lost setter dog. It was a small square of type plain and unadorned. The Blackwood family of the Montana Territory seeks a woman of good character, literate, resilient, willing to learn the ways of a mountain homestead. We promise her respect, protection, and a fair arrangement. No obligations beyond her consent. Respond to E. Blackwood, care of Silver Creek General Delivery. She read it 3 times, then she read it a fourth. The word that held her was consent. No man in Philadelphia had ever used that word to her. Not once. She wrote the letter that night. She told him the truth, all of it, about her parents, about the Ashfords, about the candlestick. She thought if he is the kind of man who would judge a woman for defending herself, he is a man I do not want to go to anyway. And if the letter brings no answer, I will know what I need to know. The answer came 6 weeks later. Inside the envelope was a short note in a careful, blocky hand. Miss Thornberry, your honesty honors you. $50 in silver and a train ticket are enclosed. Silver Creek, Montana Territory, October 15th. I will see that you are met at the station. The winters are hard here, and the mountain does not forgive mistakes. But no man will ever raise a hand to you while I am living. Ezekiel Blackwood. She had read that letter so many times on the trains that the paper had gone soft at the folds. She had not known until she stepped down from the stagecoach into the mud of Silver Creek that no one would be there to meet her after all, that the station master would give her a long look and then suddenly find something to do in the back room, that the one old man on the bench outside the livery would spit tobacco and say, "Those Blackwood boys, 6 miles up. You will find them if they want you to find them." She had asked twice more for a wagon. Twice more she had been told there was none to spare. A woman in a yellow bonnet on the boardwalk had said something under her breath to another woman, and both of them had laughed behind their gloved hands, and Adelaide had heard the words "fourth one" plainly. So she had set out on foot. And here she was, 3 hours past sundown, a stranger's arm around her on a stranger's horse climbing into country that had no use for Philadelphia girls. The horse climbed for what felt like a long time. The snow kept falling. Adelaide, deep inside the bear coat, felt her body slowly begin to remember itself. Her hands ached. Her feet ached worse. She took that pain as a kind of good news because she had heard her father once say that frostbite only hurts until the hour before it kills you. She became aware slowly of the man behind her, of the steadiness of him. His chest was against her back, and she could feel through all the layers of coat and shirt and fur that he did not shiver, that his breathing did not catch. He rode like a man who had ridden in worse weather than this and considered it a Tuesday. Twice he spoke to the horse very softly. Once he spoke over his shoulder to his brothers, and she caught the words "ridge" and "fresh." Raph, the youngest, answered from somewhere behind them. "2 sets, unshod, headed south when they made them. Day old more, but not by much." Ezekiel Blackwood said nothing to this, but Adelaide felt his arm tighten just slightly at her waist, not in fear, in confirmation of something he had already suspected. She did not understand yet, but she filed the moment away. Then through the trees she saw the cabin. It rose out of the snow in a small clearing, like something that had been waiting for her. 2 stories of squared pine logs, chinked tight with a stone chimney on the east end as broad as a man's chest, and warm yellow light leaking out of 2 downstairs windows. A covered porch ran the length of the front. Beyond it, she could make out the shapes of a barn, a smokehouse, a long, low wood shed stacked to the eaves. Everything stood square. Everything stood plumb. No lazy angles, no softness of rot. This was the home of men who believed that a building well built was a kind of prayer. Ezekiel Blackwood drew up at the porch, swung down first, and reached up for her. "Come on down, Miss Thornberry," he said. "You are home for tonight." He lifted her like before and carried her up the steps and shouldered through the door into a blast of heat and wood smoke and the smell of stew. The front room was long and broad. A stone fireplace dominated one wall bigger than she had seen in Philadelphia parlors 3 times the size. A bearskin lay before the hearth. Shelves of books rose on either side, more books than a rich man's library she had once dusted. A long plank table, 6 chairs handmade, a wool rug, a single kerosene lamp burning low on the mantel. Obadiah Blackwood had already swung down off his horse and come in ahead of them because the pot on the crane above the fire had been pulled forward and was beginning to simmer. He tossed his hat on a peg and turned, and Adelaide got her first real look at him in the light. Obie was tall like his brother but leaner. A craftsman's build, not a fighter's. His hair was the color of old wheat tied loosely at the nape. His eyes were gray-green and quiet, and they looked at her without any of the sizing up she had braced herself for. They looked at her the way a good doctor looks at a patient, checking for what needed tending first. "Sit her by the fire, Zeke," he said. His voice was softer than his brother's. "I will get the water warm. She is going to need her feet seen to." Ezekiel called Zeke by his brother, set her down on a low bench near the hearth. Then he knelt in front of her, and without a word he began unlacing her ruined boots. His hands were large and calloused and scarred across the knuckles. He worked with the same slow care he would have used on a full split hoof. When the first boot came off, she cried out softly because her foot had gone the color of a plum. He looked up at her. "Easy now," he said. "We have seen worse come back." The door opened again and Raph came in, stamping snow from his boots on the porch. First, because a man who tracked snow into a house built by his own father was no kind of son. He set his Winchester on a rack by the door. His hat came off and his hair was dark and thick and slightly curled from the wet, and his eyes were amber like his oldest brother's, and they too swept the room checking before they settled briefly on Adelaide. He nodded at her once, a short formal nod. Then he moved past them all and went straight to the back door and out because the horses still needed seeing to, and a Blackwood did not warm himself before he warmed his animals. She understood this without being told. She had already begun to understand many things about the Blackwoods without being told. Obie brought a copper basin of warm water, not hot. He set it at her feet and he looked at Zeke. "You want me to?" "I will," Zeke said quietly. "You get the stew to her." Obie nodded. He went to the stove. Zeke took her bare feet one at a time and lowered them into the basin. It hurt. God, it hurt. She bit down on the inside of her cheek to keep from making a sound, and failed and made one anyway, a small sharp gasp. Zeke did not look up. He cupped the water over the skin very slowly, letting the warmth ease in by degrees the way a man brings a cold calf back without shocking its heart. "You will keep all 10 toes," he said after a while. "You will not like me for the next hour, but you will keep them." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in 6 years. She did not weep. She had decided somewhere back on the snow that she would not weep in front of these men. Not until she knew what sort of men they were. But something wet slid out of the corner of one eye anyway, and she turned her face so he would not see, and he did not look up because he was a man who had the good sense to allow a woman her privacy even when she sat in his own front room. Obie brought her a tin cup of something hot and the bowl of stew. "Venison," he said. "Ma'am, eat it slow. Your stomach has been empty too long. Take 3 spoons and then wait. I know it smells better than that, but trust me." She took 3 spoons. It was the best food she had ever tasted. She waited. Raph came in from the barn, shook the snow from his coat, and hung it. He crossed to the fire, crouched near her feet, and held his hands out to the flame without speaking. He smelled of horses and cold air, and a sweet grass hay she did not know the name of. He was the quietest of them she could see, not because he was shy, because he was watching always, and watching requires silence. The fire popped. The stew simmered. The house settled around them like a living thing that had known her name all along. and Zeke Blackwood kept cupping warm water over her ruined feet in silence for nearly an hour, without once letting the water go cold. It was in that hour that Adelaide Thornberry understood the first important thing about the Blackwood brothers. They did not talk about what they would do. They did it. When she could walk again on stocking feet, they moved her to the long table. Obie set a plate in front of her with more stew and a thick slice of brown bread spread with honey butter. Zeke fetched a pair of thick wool socks from a chest and laid them beside her without ceremony. Raph poured her coffee. None of them sat. They stood around the table, one at the fire, one at the stove, one at the door looking out at the dark, and they let her eat. Only when she had finished the last of it and pushed the plate away did Zeke come to sit across from her. He set his hat on the table. He folded his hands in front of him. His hands were very large and very still. "Miss Thornberry," he said, "I owe you an honest conversation. I would rather have had it when you were not half frozen, but there is no telling what tomorrow will look like, so I would rather have it now." She nodded. She did not trust her voice. He reached inside his vest and drew out a leather pouch. He opened it and he counted onto the table one by one 10 double eagle gold pieces, $200, 4 times what he had sent her. He pushed it across the boards toward her. "This is yours," he said, "no matter what you decide. The ticket back to Philadelphia is already paid as far as St. Paul. That stays paid. You are not trapped here." She looked at the gold. She did not touch it. "Why so much?" she said. Her voice was rougher than she had expected. "Because I owe you an apology, and an apology without some weight behind it is only words." She waited. He glanced once at Obie, then at Raph, and some quiet thing passed between the three of them that she could not read. "The letter I wrote you," Zeke said, "the one in Harper's Weekly. I signed it with my name because it was my hand that wrote it. But the three of us put it there together, my brothers and I." She let out a slow breath. "I see. You may not yet, so let me say it plain. Our father died 6 years ago. On his last night, he took our hands, and he made us swear to him that the Blackwood name would not end on this mountain, that we would find wives, that we would raise children here, that the cabin he built with his own 2 hands, the land he bled for, would go on past us. The three of us made that oath." He paused. His amber eyes did not leave hers. "I buried my wife, Rosalind, 8 years ago. She was carrying our first child. I will not speak more of that tonight, but it is not a wound that is closed. It has been 6 years since our father died, and in those 6 years I have not been able to bring myself to go looking. So the oath has sat on us like a stone. My brothers are not married men, and time, Miss Thornberry, is a river that does not run backward." She nodded slowly. She was beginning to see. "We wrote the advertisement together," he said. "We signed my name because I am the eldest, and because it would have been strange to sign 3 names as such a letter. But the truth is this: we did not bring you here to be my wife. We brought you here to meet the 3 of us, and in your own time, if any of us suits you, you may choose. One of us, or none. If you choose none, the gold on the table is yours, and a driver will take you back down to the stagecoach in the spring or sooner if the passes allow." Adelaide sat very still. She had thought she was coming to marry a man. She had thought she had already made her peace with that. She had not thought she would be asked to choose. In Philadelphia, no woman of her station was ever asked to choose. She looked at Obie standing by the fire, tall and quiet and steady. She looked at Raph by the door, his face half turned to the dark glass. She looked back at Zeke. "3 cabins of brides before me," she said softly. Is that what the woman on the boardwalk meant? For the first time, something in Zeke's face changed, a tightening, a grief. "3 women came before you," he said. "Not one of them lasted the week. The first took one look at the snow and wept until we took her back down. The second said we smelled of animals. The third was afraid of all 3 of us at once, and I could not fault her for it. I think we had not yet learned how to ask a frightened woman into a house of men without frightening her more. And now, he said, I think we have learned. I hope we have. But you will be the judge of that, not me." She looked down at the gold on the table. 10 coins. In Philadelphia, $200 would have bought her 2 years of rent and a modest life. In Philadelphia, $200 would have meant she never had to pick up a silver candlestick again. She pushed the gold back toward him across the boards. I have not decided yet, she said, whether to stay or to go, but I will not take pay for a decision I have not made. Keep it until I have. Something in Zeke's jaw moved. Something softened in Obi's eyes by the fire. Raph at the door did not turn his head, but his shoulders eased a quarter inch. 3 months, Zeke said. That is what we ask. 3 months through the worst of the winter to know us and for us to know you. Your room is upstairs. The door has a bolt on the inside. The key is yours. We three sleep on this floor always. In 3 months, if you choose one of us, we will go to the preacher in Silver Creek. If you choose none, you go home in the spring with that gold and more, and no man in this house will think ill of you. And if I want to leave sooner, then we saddle a horse. He said it simply. No clause, no condition. She sat with that for a long moment. The fire popped. A log shifted in the grate. Somewhere outside, the wind pressed against a shutter. Mr. Blackwood, she said. 3 months. Zeke nodded once as if a deal had been sealed and stood. Obi will show you to your room. There is hot water on the stove if you want to wash. Your bag is already up there. Sleep as late as you need. No work is asked of you tomorrow or the day after unless you want it. He picked his hat up off the table. He set it on his head. He walked to the door and he paused with his hand on the latch. Miss Thornberry, he said without turning, I did not tell you everything tonight. There is more. There is a thing you should know about this mountain, but you are warm and fed and safe, and there is time enough in the morning for the rest of it. Sleep well. He went out into the snow. Obi took up the lamp and climbed the narrow stairs ahead of her, and she followed on stocking feet, trailing her hand along the polished pine banister. At the top, he opened a door and stepped aside. The room was not large, but it was clean and warm and waiting. A real bed with a frame of peeled pine and a thick quilt of dark reds and greens. A small iron stove burned low in the corner. A pitcher and basin on a stand. A chest at the foot of the bed. A single window that looked out onto the white world. And on the small bedside table set in a jar of water was a sprig of Blue Mountain spruce, fresh cut. The clean green smell of it filled the room. Adelaide stood in the doorway and looked at the spruce and did not move. Mr. Blackwood, she said softly, which one of you brought the spruce? Obi hesitated. Something very small and kind flickered in his gray-green eyes. Does it matter, ma'am? Yes, she said, it matters. He smiled just barely. That would be Raph, ma'am. He did not say it was for you. He came in this morning with it and put it in the jar and set it on the table and went back out to work. He did not ask anyone if it was all right. Adelaide looked at the little green sprig in its jar of water. She thought of the youngest brother, the one who had watched the ridges on the ride up, the one who had poured her coffee without a word, the one she would have picked out of the three as least likely to cut a piece of spruce for a stranger. Thank you, she said. Good night, Miss Thornberry. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. He closed the door behind him. She stood a moment in the warm quiet. She walked to the door and she put her hand on the bolt. The bolt was heavy iron, well-oiled, recently installed. The wood around it was lighter than the rest of the door. Someone had cut that bolt into the frame within the last few weeks. For her, before she arrived. She slid it home. Then she slid it back open. Then she stood looking at it for a long time. Finally, she left it unbolted just by an inch, and she went to the bed and sat down and allowed herself at last to be exactly as tired as she was. She slept that night harder than she had slept in 6 years. She did not hear the wind rise. She did not hear the shutter bang twice and settle. She did not hear somewhere down in the main room of the cabin Zeke and Obi sitting by the dying fire with 2 cups of black coffee, speaking too quiet for their voices to carry up the stair, their heads bent together the way only brothers bend. She did not hear Zeke say she has something of Rosalind about the mouth. She did not hear Obi say no, she does not. Rosalind's mouth was wider. You are seeing what you want to see, brother. She did not hear the long silence after that. She did not hear Zeke say, finally, Raph cut her spruce. She did not hear Obi say, I know he did. She did not hear either of them say the thing that both of them were thinking, which was that this fourth one was different. And that difference was going to be either the saving of this house or the ending of it. She did not hear outside in the barn Rafferty Blackwood checked his Winchester for the third time that night and then walked the perimeter of the clearing once more in the deep snow, his breath smoking in the cold moonlight, his amber eyes watching the dark trees. She did not know what he had seen earlier in the day 2 ridges over, 2 sets of unshod pony tracks, fresh, curving back on themselves the way a man curves his path when he is scouting a place he means to come back to. She did not know because she was asleep. But Raph knew, and Zeke knew because Raph had told him the moment they had gotten her inside the cabin in 3 words muttered past Zeke's ear as he carried her through the door. 2 riders, watching. Zeke had not let it show. He had taken off her boots. He had cupped warm water over her frozen feet for an hour. He had offered her gold and given her a choice and told her she was safe. And every one of those things had been true. But not every one of them had been all the truth. There was more. There was something Zeke had not told her, and something Obi would not tell her, and something Raph would tell no one at all. It had to do with a man Zeke believed he had killed 8 years ago in the high Wyoming country. A man named Cassius Crane. A man with a scar that split his face like a dry riverbed and a memory longer than any Christian man should be. Zeke had put 3 bullets in that man and left him for the wolves. But the wolves, it seemed, had not finished the job. And somewhere in the October dark on the far side of the next ridge, by a small, careful fire that showed no smoke, a rider was sharpening a long knife and smiling at nothing in particular. He was smiling because he had been patient for 8 years, and patience at last was about to be paid. Adelaide Thornberry slept on upstairs under the quilt of red and green, with a sprig of blue spruce by her head and a bolt on the door that she had chosen in the end not to close. She did not know any of it. She had 3 months. She did not have 3 months, but she slept. And outside on the long, slow mountain, the first hard snow of winter kept falling, burying the tracks of everything that had come before and making ready in its patient, cold way for all the things that were still coming. Adelaide Thornberry woke to the sound of an axe, not the frantic, thin chop of a man who does not know his work, a slow, unhurried rhythm. A man who has split 1,000 cords of wood and will split 1,000 more. The sound came up from the yard below her window and folded itself into her sleep so naturally that she did not understand at first that she was awake. Then she opened her eyes. Pale gold light lay across the pine floorboards. She sat up slowly. Her feet ached. Her back ached. Her whole body felt like a letter that had been folded too many times. But the pain had changed. It was the pain of a body coming back to itself, not one leaving it. She looked at the bolt on her door. It was still drawn back as she had left it. Nothing had come in. No one had tried. She rose wincing and went to the window. The world outside had been made new. 2 feet of clean snow on every surface. The pines stood heavy and white. The barn, the smokehouse, the long woodshed, all of them white, hatted the whole homestead like something pressed between the pages of a Christmas book. In the yard, just visible from her angle, stood Ezekiel Blackwood, stripped down to a wool shirt despite the cold-splitting rounds of seasoned pine, with the easy swinging rhythm that had woken her. He was not working because the wood was needed. The woodshed she already knew was stacked full to the roof. He was working because that was what he did in the morning, the way other men drink coffee. She watched him for a while. Then she turned from the window and washed her face at the basin. The water was cold. She gasped and gasped again, and then pinned her hair up and put on the cleanest of her 3 dresses, the dark blue wool, and went downstairs. The main room smelled of bacon and coffee and something else, something she could not place a sharp, clean green smell. Obadiah Blackwood stood at the stove with a long-handled iron skillet in a calm that suggested he had been up for hours. On the table was a small tin cup with more of the blue spruce, fresh cut, still wet with snow. "Morning, ma'am," Obie said without turning. "Coffee is on. You take it how?" "Black, please." He nodded as if that had confirmed something he had suspected about her, and poured her a cup from the battered tin pot. He set it down without flourish. He did not ask how she had slept. He did not ask if she was sore. He let her sit down in her own time, and he went back to his bacon. She wrapped both hands around the coffee. "Where is your brother?" she said after a while. "The youngest." "Raph rode out before first light. He will be back by noon." "In this snow." Obie turned and looked at her, and the corner of his mouth moved half an inch, which she was already learning was what passed for a smile with Obadiah Blackwood. "Ma'am," he said, "my brother Raph would ride out in the second coming if he thought there was something on the ridge that needed looking at." She did not know yet why Raph had ridden out. She did not know what he was looking for. She only filed the answer away the way she was filing many things away, in a place inside her that was beginning to feel less like a storeroom and more like a room she was furnishing. She ate the bacon. She ate the biscuits. She ate the fried potatoes with onion that Obie set in front of her, without asking whether she wanted them. Halfway through the meal, Zeke came in the door with a fresh armload of split pine and set it by the hearth. Snow dusted his shoulders. He did not look at her directly. He only nodded the way a man nods to another grown man at the general store and went back out for another armload, and then another. When the wood was stacked to his satisfaction, he came in a final time, stamped his boots clean, hung his coat on the peg, and sat down across from her. "Miss Thornberry," he said, "I owe you the rest of that conversation." "I thought you might." He set his hat on the bench beside him. His amber eyes were very steady in the morning light, steadier than they had been the night before. Sleep had done him some good, too, she thought, though not enough. "There is a man," he said. "He was the man who killed my wife Rosalind." Obie at the stove went still. "I tracked him for 6 months after it happened," Zeke went on. "I found him in the high country up in Wyoming. I put 3 bullets in him, one in the shoulder, one in the chest, one in the belly. I left him in the snow, and I rode away. That was 8 years ago." Adelaide set her cup down very carefully. "Go on," she said. "Last month," he said, "my brother Raph found tracks near our east fence, 2 sets of unshod pony tracks, the sort of tracks a man makes when he does not want to be known. 2 weeks ago, a man we trust, Cormac McCrae, an old Union man who homesteads 12 miles east, came up here to tell me he had heard in Bozeman that a rider had been asking after the 3 Blackwood brothers, asking in a particular way, asking where the cabin was, how many men, whether any women. And the night I came up the mountain," she said slowly, "Raph saw more tracks. 2 sets," Zeke said, "fresh, curving, scouting tracks." The coffee in her hands had gone cold without her noticing. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "are you telling me that the man you put 3 bullets in is still alive?" "I am telling you I do not know. I am telling you that if he is the kind of man who does not forget. His name is Cassius Crane, and he rode with the Missouri bushwhackers during the war, and did not stop being one when the war ended. He wanted our mine, our land, and when my wife would not tell him where the silver was, he burned our first cabin to the ground with her inside it." He said this the way another man might have reported the weather. She understood that this was how he had learned to speak of it. "Why tell me this now?" she said. "You could have kept it from me. I would not have known." "You would have known," he said, "sooner or later, and you would have been angry that I did not say it. I said last night that no man in this house would lie to you. That meant last night. That means this morning. That means always." She did not know what to do with that. She had spent 6 years in a house where a man had smiled at her across a breakfast table and lied with his eyes. And now she sat in a different kind of house, at a different kind of table, across from a different kind of man, and he was telling her hard, unvarnished truths, because that was the only kind he knew how to tell. She set her cup down. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I have not changed my mind about the 3 months. If this man is coming, I would rather be here than on a train south with the knowledge that you and your brothers were waiting on him alone." For a long moment, Zeke did not answer. Then he said very quietly, "All right, Miss Thornberry." And from the stove, Obie let out a breath she had not known he was holding. The days began to find their own shape. She learned the rhythms of the Blackwood cabin the way a new horse learns a barn. First by bumping into things, then by knowing where the things were, and finally by knowing why they were where they were. There was a reason for every angle of the place. The wood box was by the east door because the prevailing wind came from the west, and the east door was sheltered. The butter churn was in the cool pantry because the stone floor held the cold. The rifle rack was beside the main door at exactly the height where a man of Zeke's size could take a Winchester down without looking. The Colts were each kept in the same drawer, cleaned weekly, loaded always. These things were not nerves. These were the habits of men who had survived a long time because they had not let themselves grow soft. She began to work, not because anyone asked her to, because she could not sit. She took over the bread. Obie, for all his other gifts, made a loaf that sat in the stomach like a flat iron. She taught him the second morning the way her mother had taught her. 10 full minutes of kneading, the heel of the hand, not the fingertips. Rest the dough in a warm place covered. Do not open the oven before the crust has set. Obie stood at her elbow and watched the way a man watches a lesson he means to remember. And by the end of the week, the cabin smelled like her mother's kitchen in Sussex 30 years gone, and Adelaide had to turn to the window twice to blink before anyone saw her face. She took the ledger. Zeke had been keeping the trapline accounts in a square, blocky hand in a leather book, and when she opened it, she found that for a man of his intelligence, he had the arithmetic of a farmer's boy. She rebuilt 3 months of his figures in an afternoon and showed him where the Helena fur buyer had been underpaying him by 4 cents a pelt on mink. Zeke read her column twice and then looked up at her with something that was almost a smile. "Miss Thornberry," he said, "you just paid for a winter's worth of coffee." "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "you just paid for a winter's worth of coffee. I only counted it." She saw his shoulders move with a silent breath of laughter. It was the first time she had seen him laugh. Obie across the room looked up briefly from the axe handle he was shaping and exchanged a glance with no one because his brother Raph was outside and there was no one else to exchange a glance with. His eyes went back to the axe handle. Something about the set of his mouth had eased. Raph was the hardest of the three to reach and the one who taught her the most. He did not teach her out of any desire to be her instructor. He taught her because one cold, bright morning, 4 days in, he came in from the barn to find her standing in the yard with an empty water pail staring at the tree line, and when he followed her gaze, he saw the coyote, a thin gray one, 50 yards out, watching. He did not say a word. He stepped up behind her and he set his Winchester against his shoulder, and he fired once and the coyote dropped where it stood. Adelaide did not scream, did not flinch, but her hands closed so hard on the pail that her knuckles went white. Raph looked down at her. "You knew it was there," he said. "Yes." "How long?" "Long enough," she said. "I have been watching it watch me for 2 days. It came a little closer each morning." He looked at her for a long second. His amber eyes were very like his brother's, but quicker, more restless. "Ma'am," he said, "do you know how to use a gun?" "No." "You will, starting this afternoon." And that afternoon, he took her out behind the smokehouse where a row of tin cans sat on a split rail fence at 20 paces, and he put his father's Colt Peacemaker in her hand, and he stood behind her, and he did not touch her. "Feet apart," he said. "Wider, wider than that. Now your weight forward a half step. Yes. Elbow locked, but not stiff. Eye on the front blade, then the can, then the blade. Breathe in, breathe out. On the out breath, the finger does the work. The rest of you just holds the gun still." She fired. The can jumped and clattered backward into the snow. He did not say good. He said again. She hit 5 out of 6 that first afternoon. On the sixth miss, he reached past her shoulder, corrected her grip with a single gloved finger that barely grazed hers, stepped back and said, "Again." She hit 6 out of 6. He took the Colt from her, checked the chamber, holstered it in his belt. "Not bad," he said. That was the highest praise she had heard him give anyone for anything. That night, Raph did not sit at the fire with them. He went out after supper, as he did most nights, and walked the perimeter of the clearing in the hard blue dusk, his rifle on its sling, his breath smoking. She watched him from the window for a while. He was the one who did not sleep. She understood slowly that he was why the other two could. The first trip to Silver Creek was Zeke's idea. "You need cloth," he told her on the ninth morning, "and thread and whatever else a woman needs that 3 men have not thought to keep in a house. I will take you in. We leave at dawn." "It is 16 miles," she said. "It is 8 to the main track and 8 from there. The sleigh will do it in 3 hours if the horses are willing. We will be back by dark." She wanted to go. She also did not want to go. She had not forgotten the woman in the yellow bonnet on the boardwalk. The words "fourth one" had gotten into her like a splinter she could not dig out. But she went. Silver Creek in December was a huddled little town of 20 buildings pressed between 2 low hills, smoke rising from every stovepipe, one long main street rutted with sleigh tracks. Zeke pulled up in front of Peterson's Mercantile and swung down, and he came around to hand her out of the sleigh with the formal care of a man escorting his sister to a funeral. She stepped down, tucked her gloved hand into the crook of his arm without thinking, and together they went up the plank steps. The bell above the door rang, heads turned. Nathaniel Peterson behind the counter straightened up and said, "Zeke Blackwood, long time." "Nate, this is Miss Thornberry." "Ma'am." "Mr. Peterson." She had time to see 3 women standing at the far end of the counter by the bolts of cloth. She had time to see the way they went still. She had time to see one of them, a handsome woman of perhaps 40, with a fox fur collar and a jet brooch at her throat, turn her head slowly the way a cat turns its head when something interesting has walked into the room. "Well," said the woman, "Ezekiel Blackwood. And the new girl, the 4th one, I hear." Zeke did not answer. He walked to the counter, set his hat on it, and began calmly listing out what they needed. Flour, sugar, coffee, 2 pounds of molasses, a bolt of blue wool fine weight, thread black and white, a paper of needles, lard. "She will be the 4th one to run then," the woman in the fox fur said to her companions loud enough to carry. "Though I will grant you she lasted longer than the 3rd. 3 weeks, was it? Of course, none of the others had to wonder if their husband burned his first wife alive. It's that, yeah." Adelaide felt the room go still around her. Zeke did not turn. His hands resting flat on the counter did not even tighten. Nathaniel Peterson looked down at his ledger as if deeply interested in a column he had written himself. Adelaide heard herself speak before she decided to. "Mr. Peterson," she said clearly, "I will trouble you for the blue wool, please. 6 yards, and the black thread, not the white. I can make do with the black." "Yes, ma'am," Peterson said quickly. "Right away." Then she turned. Just her head. Just enough. "Madam," she said to the woman in the fox fur, in the even, pleasant voice she had once used to correct 7-year-olds on their French verbs, "I do not believe we have been introduced." The woman drew herself up. "Genevieve Ashcroft. My husband is the president of the Silver Creek Bank. I have lived in this town for 16 years. "How lovely," Adelaide said. "My name is Adelaide Thornberry of Philadelphia, most recently governess to the family of Mr. Harlan Ashford of Spruce Street. I have lived on this mountain for 12 days. 12 days is not long, dear." "No," said Adelaide, "but it is long enough to know some things. In 12 days, Mr. Blackwood has carried me through 2 feet of snow when the town of Silver Creek would not spare me a wagon. In 12 days, he has offered me $200 in gold to go home if I wish, and has asked no single thing of me that I did not freely offer. In 12 days, he has fed me, warmed me, and taught me to shoot a gun in case a man comes up that mountain meaning me harm. I do not know what your husband does in 16 years, madam, but I will tell you plainly, A man who would do those things is not a man who burned his wife. And any person who says so in a public store has confused her gossip with her gospel. The mercantile was absolutely silent. Genevieve Ashcroft's face went the color of a cranberry. Nathaniel Peterson behind the counter was making a noise that was not quite a cough. Zeke beside her had not moved. He did not move now. He only said very quietly to Peterson, the blue wool Nate, and a pair of good wool stockings in her size if you have them. Adelaide walked to the counter and laid her gloved hands flat on the boards. She did not look back at the fox fur. They left 10 minutes later with the goods loaded in the sleigh. Zeke handed her up onto the bench without comment. He climbed up beside her, he clicked to the team, and they pulled out into the street. They were a mile out of town before he spoke. Miss Thornberry. Yes. No one has spoken for me in 8 years. She looked at her gloves. I did not speak for you, Mr. Blackwood, she said. I spoke because a woman with too much money and too little to do was being unkind. I would have done it for anyone. I know you would have, he said. That is what undoes me about it. She did not answer. The sleigh hissed over fresh snow. The horses blew twin clouds of steam. The sun was breaking through a gap in the clouds, and the whole valley below them lay in that pale winter gold that comes only in the high country, only in December, only for about an hour. Mr. Blackwood, she said at last. Yes. What you said last night about the maiden, about Cassius Crane, I said it. Do the others in town know that he might still be alive? Zeke thought about that. No. Does Mrs. Ashcroft? Another long pause, longer than she had expected. I hope not, he said finally. But Mrs. Ashcroft has always known a great deal more than she has any business knowing. Adelaide heard in that answer a door not quite closing. She did not press. She had already done her work for the day. That night the gifts began. She did not think of them at first as gifts. She thought of them as the way the Blackwood men showed affection, which was by making things and leaving them. On the bedside table the second morning after Silver Creek, a small wooden box she had not seen the night before. Plain hinged, lined with a scrap of soft blue flannel. No note. When she came down for breakfast and asked whose it was, Obie did not look up from the stove and said, "My ma'am, thought you might want somewhere for your mother's brooch." The fourth morning that she found a small carved horse on the box, 4 inches high, a running mare mane flying. No note. Obie, she said. Not mine, Obie said. She found Raph in the barn mucking out a stall and she held the horse up on her palm. You, she said. He did not stop working. Looked like you could use it. It is beautiful, Mr. Blackwood. It is a piece of pine, ma'am. Rafferty. He stopped then. He leaned the fork against the wall. He looked at her, his amber eyes level. Ma'am, he said, to Ray here, nobody calls me Rafferty, but my mother did, and she has been gone a long time. Raff is fine. Ray is better from you. Ray, she said, testing it. He nodded once short and picked up his fork again. She did not understand yet what that moment had been. She only understood that she had been given a piece of something that he did not hand out often. Zeke's gifts were different. Zeke did not carve. Zeke read. She came down on the 5th morning and found on the seat of her chair at the long table, a slim leather-bound volume of the poems of Walt Whitman. The pages smelled of wood smoke and old paper and whatever shelf they had come from. She looked up. Zeke was at the far end of the room oiling a saddle. Mr. Blackwood? Figured you might want something to read in the evenings, he said without lifting his head. That one is mine. Keep it as long as you like. That night she read him aloud by the fire. She read When I Heard the Learned Astronomer and Omeo Life, and when she got to the line about the powerful play going on, and you may contribute a verse, her voice caught just a little. And when she looked up, she found that both Zeke and Obie were looking at her in that still way. Men look at something they do not want to frighten off. Raph was not in the room. Raph, as usual, was outside. She read 3 more poems. Then she closed the book and set it on her knee. Mr. Blackwood, she said to Zeke, Tell me about Rosalind. The fire popped. Obubi got up quietly and went to the kitchen end of the room, not to leave, but to give his brother the room to answer if he chose. Zeke set the bit of saddle he was oiling on his knee. She was from Pennsylvania, he said, a town called Warren. Her people were Scotland, Irish, old farmers, come west after the war because the land back east was played out. I was scouting for the army then in '73 in and out of Helena. I saw her at a church social. She had a laugh that carried across a room. I asked her to dance, and she said she did not dance with soldiers, and I said I was not a soldier anymore, and she said, "Prove it, Mr. Blackwood." He paused. "So I did," he said. I mustered out. "I came home to this mountain. I built a cabin on the East Flat. Not this one, a smaller one. We were married in '74. She was carrying our first child in '76. She was 7 months along." A log shifted in the grate and sent up a small spray of sparks. "Cassius Crane and his men came up the trace on an April morning," Zeke said. "I was up at the North Trap Line. 2 days gone. Crane wanted the mine. My father had hinted at silver on that ridge for years. Crane had gotten it into his head that it was more than a hint. Rosalind would not tell him where the samples were. I do not know if she knew or not. I know she did not tell him." His hands on the saddle were very still. "They burned the cabin with her inside," he said. "I came home to ash." Adelaide did not speak. She did not touch him. She only sat very still and let him finish. "I tracked him for 6 months," Zeke said, "into Wyoming. I caught him in a high pass in October. I shot him 3 times and I left him in the snow. I rode home and I did not speak for a year. My brothers built this cabin around me while I did not speak. My father lived 4 more years after that, and he did not say a hard word to me about my silence. But on his last night, he took my hand and he said, 'Ezekiel, the Blackwood name does not die on this mountain. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?'" He looked up at her then. His amber eyes in the firelight were not the eyes of a hard man. They were the eyes of a man who had been carrying a weight for so long, he had forgotten what his hands were shaped for. "I have been trying," he said, "for 6 years to hear him, and I have not been able to." Adelaide reached across the small distance between her chair and his and set her hand palm down on the back of his. She did not say a word. He did not move his hand. They sat that way for a long time. Behind them from the kitchen end of the room, the sound of Obi very quietly setting a coffee cup on a shelf and very quietly going out to the porch to let his brother have the room. That night, for the first time in 12 days, Adelaide Thornberry did not bolt her door. She did not unbolt it to invite anyone in. She unbolted it because she no longer needed it bolted. There is a difference, and she understood that difference in the dark, lying in the quilt of reds and greens with her mother's cameo brooch, safely in its small wooden box on the table, and a carved pine mare beside it, and a book of Walt Whitman's poems under her pillow. She understood that the 3 men downstairs were each in their own language asking her to stay. She understood that she had not decided yet, but she understood also that she was no longer trying to decide. She was trying not to admit that she already had. Outside, the wind moved in the high pines. The horses in the barn shifted and blew. Somewhere far off, a wolf spoke once to the moon. And 2 ridges east, in a small camp that made no smoke, Cassius Crane sat by a cold stove in a log shack and sharpened a long knife on a whetstone. He had aged badly in 8 years. The 3 bullets Zeke Blackwood had put in him had left him twisted on one side. He walked now with a heavy limp. His eyes were sunken. The scar that had always split his face had widened and darkened until it looked like a crack in old leather. He had 12 men with him. He had been gathering them since April. They were paid in promises and in pieces of silver he had not yet dug out of the ground. He was in no hurry. A man who had waited 8 years could wait 3 more weeks. He was waiting for the deepest part of winter, when the passes would close behind him and no help could come up from Silver Creek. He was waiting for the night the Blackwood brothers thought they were safest. He was waiting for the moment Ezekiel Blackwood had begun finally to believe that the past was truly past. Crane tested the edge of the knife on the pad of his thumb. A small, bright bead of blood appeared. He watched it for a moment, then wiped it on his trousers. Soon Blackwood, he said to no one. Very soon. Up at the cabin, Adelaide turned in her sleep and smiled at something in a dream she would not remember in the morning. And in the main room below her, Zeke Blackwood sat alone by the banked fire with the open book of Whitman on his knee, and he read very quietly under his breath the lines she had read aloud to him hours before, that the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. He closed the book. He looked up at the ceiling toward her room. All right, father, he said softly to a man 8 years in the ground. All right, I hear you. Then he blew out the lamp, and the cabin went dark, and the first really hard snow of the winter began to fall across the whole of the Montana Territory, closing the high passes one by one, sealing the mountain, and everyone on it inside a world that for a little while longer was still their own. The attack came on a Monday. Mondays in the Blackwood cabin had a shape to them. The men rode the trap lines. The women, and by now there was a woman, baked bread and mended and laid in for the week. Obadiah Blackwood was the one who made the runs to town because Zeke did not like to go more than was needed, and Raph did not like to go at all. Obie hitched the gray mare to the sleigh, and Adelaide climbed up beside him with a list, and they set out for Silver Creek at first light, with the morning star still hanging over the western ridge like a single clean lantern. They were not worried about the ride. They should have been. 6 weeks had passed since the first snow. 6 weeks since Adelaide had stopped bolting her door. In that time, 100 small things had changed. Obie had begun to hum while he worked at something Zeke said quietly one evening he had not heard his brother do since their mother had been alive. Raph had begun taking his supper at the table instead of at the hearth. Zeke had begun to laugh just once or twice a week short and surprised as if the laughter caught him by the sleeve before he knew it was there. And Adelaide, between the bread and the ledger and the poems in the evenings, had found that she was not a governess in exile. She was something else. She was not yet sure the word for it. On that Monday morning, riding down the mountain beside Obie, she was humming herself soft under her breath, a hymn her mother had liked. Obie heard it. He did not smile. He only said, "You sound like you are at home, ma'am." She stopped humming for a moment. Then she went on. Neither of them said anything else. They did their business in Silver Creek. Adelaide saw Genevieve Ashcroft once across the street, and Genevieve saw her, and neither woman spoke. A small nod passed between them that was not friendship and not enmity either. It was the nod of two women who had taken each other's measure and agreed for now to a kind of armed truce. Obie bought camphor and laudanum and a bottle of carbolic from the druggist because one of the horses had developed a cough, and some sugar and flour and a tin of tea Adelaide had asked for. He paid cash. He touched his hat to Nathaniel Peterson. They loaded the sleigh and turned for home. They were 3 miles out of town in the long, shadowed pass between two low wooded ridges when the 4 riders came out of the trees. They came out clean and spread. 2 from the left, 2 from the right. They were not bandits in the storybook sense. They wore good coats and carried good weapons. The man at the center of them rode a big bay. A heavy man, ugly, mouth, not Crane. Crane was not there, but the heavy man smiled when he saw Obie. "Obadiah Blackwood," he said. 8 years boy, you have not grown much. Adelaide saw Obie's hand move inside his coat. It was a small movement. She did not know in that first second what it meant. The man went on. "Your big brother used to tell stories about you. Smart one, he called you. Quiet one, thinks too much. That true." Obie said very evenly, "Miss Thornberry, get down off this sleigh and get behind me on the running board." She did not ask why. She moved. What happened next happened in less time than it takes to say grace. Obie drew a pistol from inside his coat and fired twice. 2 men went off their horses. He shouted, "Down, down, Della!" And she dropped flat against the running board with her hands over her head, and the 3rd rider fired, and the bullet took Obie high in the thigh and sprayed red across the bench where she had been sitting 2 seconds before. Obi kept firing. The third rider went down. The fourth rider, the heavy one, did not fire. He spurred his horse straight at the sleigh, and he vaulted down off it while it was still moving, and he was on the running board almost before Adelaide knew he had left his saddle. He caught her by the collar. He was huge and stank of old tobacco and whiskey, and his free hand was drawing a long knife out of his belt. Adelaide did not scream. She had 3 weeks earlier, in a joke that was not quite a joke, asked Raph if a woman could carry a small gun in her sleeve. Raph had looked at her for a long moment. The next morning, a small silver Remington Derringer had appeared on her breakfast plate. She had carried it since. She had never told Zeke. She had not told Obi either. She drew it now. She put the short barrel under the heavy man's chin. She fired once. The sound was very small. The result was not. He went over backward off the sleigh, and he did not move again. Not Crane. She saw the face clearly in that last instant. A stranger. One of his men. Crane had sent others to do the first work. Adelaide sat up. Her ears were ringing. Obi was slumped against the sleigh rail. Blood was spreading through the wool of his trousers and down into the floorboards. The gray mare was tossing her head and trying to bolt, and Adelaide lunged across the bench and got the reins and turned her and held her and said, "Go, girl, go, 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 boy." And then to Obi, "Stay with me, Mr. Blackwood. You stay with me. I have not chosen which of you I want yet, and you will not cheat me of that decision." Obi laughed, a short, pained, astonished laugh. "No, ma'am," he said. "I would not dream of it." She pressed her cloak to the wound with one hand and drove the mare with the other, and they went up the mountain at a speed that Slay had never been asked to make before. Zeke heard the shots from 3 miles away. He and Raph had been up at the North Trap Line. 3 miles is a long way for a gunshot to travel on a winter morning, but cold, clean air carries sound the way a hearth carries heat. Both men stopped at the same instant. Both men were already mounted before they had spoken. They came down the trail at a gallop. They met the sleigh a half-mile below the cabin. Zeke was off his horse before it had stopped. He saw Obi. He saw the blood. He saw Adelaide's hands, red to the wrist, still pressed to his brother's thigh. He did not ask what had happened. He said, "How bad?" "Clean through," Adelaide said. "Out the back. Bleeding is slowing. He needs the doctor." "Raph," Zeke said. Raph was already wheeling his horse. "Holloway, I will be back inside 3 hours, or I will be dead." He was gone down the trail in a spray of snow. Zeke and Adelaide got Obi to the cabin. They laid him on the long table. Adelaide cut away the trouser leg with the sewing shears from her apron. Zeke boiled water. Zeke had packed wounds in the war, and he had packed them since, and his hands did not shake. Adelaide's did not either, though she had never in her life touched a bullet wound before. Something in her had gone very still and very cold, the way it had gone still and cold with the candlestick in the Philadelphia library, and she did her work without thinking about it and did not realize until afterward that she had been doing it. Raph was back in 2 hours and 40 minutes with Dr. Phineas Holloway behind him on a second horse. Holloway was a veteran of Shiloh and had been pulling lead out of men for 20 years. He cleaned the wound with carbolic. He probed it with a long, thin instrument and nodded once. He threaded a curved needle and sewed the muscle and then the skin, and he dressed it with lint and bandages. "Clean shot," he told Zeke. "Missed the artery by the width of a prayer. He will walk on it in 3 weeks. Keep him still and keep the wound clean and watch for fever." He took coffee. He took payment. He did not ask what had happened. He had been in this country long enough not to ask. When he was gone, Zeke came and stood at the head of the table where his brother slept fitfully under laudanum. Adelaide was wiping her hands on a clean rag. The rag was pink. Zeke looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Thornberry," he said, "did you shoot a man today?" "Yes." "Where did you get the gun?" "Your brother Raph." Zeke did not turn. He did not have to. Raph by the door did not speak. "How many rounds?" "1." "Did you hit what you aimed at?" "Yes." Zeke nodded once. His jaw worked. Then he walked across the room and he put his large hand very briefly on the top of her head, the way a man blesses a child or a priest blesses a grave. Good, he said. He did not say anything else. He did not have to. That evening, Obi began to burn. The fever came on fast, as bullet fevers do. By midnight, he was shivering hard under 3 blankets and muttering. By first light, he was calling out to people who were not in the room. He called for his mother, dead 20 years. He called for his father, dead 6. And twice very softly he called for Rosalind. Adelaide, sitting beside him in the dark with a basin of cool water, and a cloth, heard the name the second time and went still. Zeke, who had been at the window watching the tree line with a rifle across his knees, heard it too. Neither of them spoke. Adelaide went on wiping her brother-in-law's forehead. Near dawn of the second night, Obi's fever broke. He surfaced slowly the way a man swims up from a long dive. He saw Adelaide first. He took a moment to find his voice. "Miss Della," he said. "I am here." "How long?" "2 days." He closed his eyes, then he opened them again. "She taught me to write 'em," he said. "Who?" "Rosalind. I was 24 when Zeke brought her home. Our ma had been gone 10 years. Pa did not read. Zeke read some, but not well. Rosalind had a schoolmaster father back in Pennsylvania. She sat me down at the kitchen table that first winter, a grown man who could barely spell his own name, and she taught me my letters and my words without ever once making me feel small for not knowing them. Adelaide understood then a thing she had not understood before. She understood why Obadiah Blackwood had wanted a woman in the cabin again. Not for himself, not for the oath, because a house of men without a woman in it had forgotten how to praise a grown man for being quiet and thoughtful and good, and Obi had been waiting without quite knowing it for someone to call him smart again. She squeezed his hand. "You are a good man, Mr. Blackwood," she said, "and your bread is getting much better." He laughed. It hurt him. He laughed anyway. Zeke and Raph had not been idle those 2 days. While Adelaide nursed Obi, Zeke, and Raph, and old Cormac McCrae had ridden out. They had followed the sleigh's backtrack to the pass. They had counted the dead. 4 of them. None of them was Cassius Crane. They had ridden a wider arc. 2 days on horseback in the deep cold. They found the camp on the second afternoon in a blown-down stand of lodgepole pine on a saddle 2 ridges east. The ashes were cold. Crane and whatever men he still had with him were gone, moved deeper into the high country, choosing their moment. In the ashes they found a piece of oilcloth. On the oilcloth, charted the edges, written in pencil in a hand that sloped crookedly, a single sentence. "Ezekiel, I am still here, so is the debt." Zeke folded the oilcloth very carefully. He put it inside his coat. He did not show it to Adelaide when they got home. He did not show it to Obi. He showed it to Raph, and only to Raph. Raph read it and handed it back. "How many left?" he said. 8, maybe 7, not fewer. Against the 3 of us. 2, Zeke said. "Obi cannot ride." "The 3 of us?" Raph repeated without emphasis. Zeke looked at his youngest brother. Something passed between them that no one who had not been brothers on a mountain for 30 years would have been able to read. "All right," Zeke said. That was the day, a week after the attack on the sleigh, that Adelaide cornered Zeke in the barn. She had known for 3 days that something was being kept from her. Zeke had been too quiet at supper. Raph had been cleaning weapons he had already cleaned. Old Cormac McCrae had ridden up twice in 1 week and had stood with Zeke by the corral talking in low voices and had not come in for coffee. She walked into the barn at dusk. Zeke was at the workbench oiling his Winchester. He looked up. "Miss Thornberry, Mr. Blackwood, does Obi need me?" "Obi is asleep. I would like you to tell me what you are not telling Sasim." He set the rifle down slowly. He did not try to lie. "Cassius Crane is alive," he said. "He was not at the sleigh. He sent 4 men to find out whether we were soft. We were not, thanks to you. He still has 8 men at least. He is waiting somewhere in the high country for the right night. And what will you do?" "We will not wait for him to come here." "You mean to go after him?" "Yes." "When?" Soon, within the week. She stood in the lamplight in the barn for a moment. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her face was very calm. "You will leave me here," she said. "Yes." "With Obi?" "Yes." "Lone?" "Cormac will come down and stay at the cabin. His boy, too. You will not be alone. You will be 3 men against 8. 3 Blackwoods," Zeke said, and Cormac McCrae, "against 8 men who do not know the country the way we do." She looked at him. Her eyes were very blue in the lamplight. "Zeke," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name. "If you do not come back," she said, "what am I to do?" "There is a strong box under the floor of the pantry," he said. "The key is in the top drawer of the desk. There is $900 in it in gold. The deed to this cabin and the 80 acres around it is in your name. Raff rewrote it 3 days ago and wrote it down to the land office in Helena yesterday. Obi will take you back down to Silver Creek when his leg will bear it. From there you can do as you wish." She did not answer for a very long time. "You put the deed in my name," she said at last. 3 days ago, without telling me." "Yes." "Before you knew whether I would stay." "Yes." "Why?" "Because either way," he said, "this place has been yours since the morning after you came. I was slow to see it, but I saw it. I was not going to leave you with nothing if I did not come home." She did not move. She did not weep. She walked to him across the barn floor, and she put her forehead against the center of his chest. He was very still. After a moment, one of his large hands came up and settled gently on the back of her head. "Zeke," she said into his coat. "Della, if you die on that mountain, I will come up it and drag you home myself. Do you hear me?" "I hear you. Do not die. I will do my best." The storm came in that night, a 3-day blizzard out of the north, and it kept everyone in the cabin and in their skins. The men cleaned their weapons. Adelaide nursed Obi. The fire burned. The wind pressed the walls of the cabin the way a cold sea presses a ship. On the second night of the storm, long after Obi had fallen asleep, Adelaide came down the stairs in her shawl. The fire was banked low. Zeke sat alone in front of it in the big chair. He was not reading. He was not oiling anything. He was simply sitting looking into the coals the way a man sits when he has run out of things that can be fixed with his hands. She crossed to him, and she sat on the bearskin at his feet, and she leaned her shoulder against his knee. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said quietly, 8 years ago, I stood in the ashes of my first cabin with my wife's wedding ring in my hand, and I told God plainly that I was finished, that I was done with love and done with hope and done with the whole soft side of a man. I meant it. For 8 years, I meant it." "I know," she said. "When I saw you in the snow that night, I thought another one, another woman we will not keep. I told myself I would be kind. I told myself I would pay for the ticket home. I told myself I would not feel it when you left. And now," he looked down at her then. His amber eyes in the firelight were as steady as she had ever seen them, and as unguarded. "Adelaide Thornberry," he said, "I have not been able to see Rosalind's face for 6 weeks. When I close my eyes at night, I do not see her. I see you. That is not a thing I meant to happen. It happened anyway. I do not know if it is love. I have been without it long enough that I am no longer sure I know the shape of the word. But I know that if you leave this mountain in the spring, I will stand at the bottom of the trail and watch the stagecoach go, and a piece of me will go with it that I had given up on ever growing back." She did not answer in words. She rose onto her knees on the bearskin, and she put her hands on his face, and she kissed him once very slowly, the way a woman kisses a man she has been careful with for a long time. His beard was rough, his mouth was warm. His one hand came up and cupped the back of her head, trembling just enough that she felt it through her hair, and the other rested lightly on her shoulder as if he did not trust himself with more. When she drew back, his eyes were wet. He did not bother to hide it. "I have not chosen a name yet, Mr. Blackwood," she whispered. "Out of respect for your brothers." But my heart chose the night I saw you cup warm water over my feet. Zeke closed his eyes. He pressed his forehead to hers. Then come back to me from that mountain, she said, because if you do not, I will not forgive you. I will come back, he said. And that was all they said that night. He walked her to the foot of the stairs. She went up. She slept under the quilt of reds and greens with her hand on the carved pine mare, and she did not dream. Outside, the storm slackened, and 2 days later the riders came. It was not yet dawn. Adelaide woke to the sound of horses in the yard. Many horses. She sat up sharply. She heard men's voices below, urgent low. She heard her name called once softly by Zeke. She came down the stairs with her shawl around her shoulders. Raph was standing at the open door with his rifle. Cormac McCrae sat at the table in his long coat, his hat on his knee, his face gray. His eldest son, a young man of perhaps 20, stood behind him. Miss Thornberry, Cormac said. His voice was thin. They came from my place last night. She looked at Zeke. Zeke's jaw was a line of iron. Crane hit the McCrae homestead 2 hours after midnight, Zeke said. Cormac caught lead in the chest, but is going to live, God willing. 2 of Crane's men are dead in Cormac's yard. Crane took the rest and moved west. Towards us, Adelaide said. No, Zeke said. He turned south. He is moving to cut us off at Black Pine Pass. If he takes the pass, we cannot get down to Silver Creek for help, and no one can come up. He means to starve us off the mountain and pick us off at his leisure. Then we ride to the pass tonight. We hold it. 2 good rifles in the rocks at Black Pine can hold that pass against twice what Crane has left. Zeke. Della. You said you would go within the week. You did not say tonight. The week, he said, ran out last night at the McCrae place. She did not argue. She did not argue because she had already decided, standing on the stair with her shawl around her shoulders, that she would not send him off to a fight with a quarrel in his pocket. A woman with any sense did not do that. She made coffee. She packed them jerky and hard biscuit in a small bag of ground coffee each. She checked Raph's rifle for him and handed it back. She touched Obi's shoulder where he slept in the back room and did not wake him. She stood in the yard in the cold blue pre-dawn as the 2 brothers swung up onto their horses. Raph looked down at her. Della, he said. Ray, keep that Derringer where you can reach it. I will. And if you have to shoot a man in this house before we get back, do not hesitate. I will not. He nodded. He wheeled his horse. Obi at the window was awake after all. He lifted one hand to his brother's. He could not walk, but he could watch. Zeke sat his horse last. He looked down at her for a long moment. He did not say anything showy. He only tipped his hat the way he had tipped it to her that first morning in the Mercantile, and he said, Bolt the door, Miss Thornberry. Come back, Mr. Blackwood. Yes, ma'am. They rode out. She stood in the yard until she could no longer hear the hoofbeats. Then she went inside. She bolted the main door behind her, the heavy oak one Zeke's father had hung 30 years before, a door that had never been bolted in daylight in her memory of the house. She put fresh wood on the fire, and she sat down at the long table with her hands flat on the wood, and she closed her eyes and she did not weep. She prayed. She had not prayed in earnest since her father's last night. She prayed now, not fancy, not practiced, plain words from a plain woman to a God she had half given up believing listened. Bring them back, all 3 of them. I am not done here. When she opened her eyes, Cormac McCrae's boy was standing quietly by the door with his rifle waiting for her orders. Put the gray in the barn, she said, and bring the Winchester down from the rack. We will not be taken sleeping. Yes, ma'am. An hour later, a lone sleigh came up the track. Adelaide saw it through the window. 1 horse, 1 driver. A woman driving bundled in a fur robe the color of winter itself. No outriders. She did not understand at first who it was. Then the sleigh pulled up in the yard and the woman threw back her hood and Adelaide saw Genevieve Ashcroft. Her hair was wild. Her face was white. She had been crying hard for a long time. The fur collar at her throat was dark with what looked like blood. though the blood was not hers. Adelaide went out onto the porch with the Winchester held low but visible. "Mrs. Ashcroft," she said. "Miss Thornberry," Genevieve said. Her voice broke on the name. "I have come to tell the Blackwood brothers the truth. I see I am too late for that, so I will tell it to you, and you will tell them if they live." "Come down off that sleigh," Adelaide said. "Miss Thornberry, please. Hear me first. Cassius Crane is coming. He is coming tonight. He made my husband tell him how the land lies. My husband is dead. Crane shot him last night after he got what he wanted. I ran. I have ridden 11 miles in the dark. I need you to hear me because there is a thing I have done that I have not been able to tell any living soul for 8 years, and I cannot die with it unsaid." Adelaide lowered the rifle. "Tell me," she said. Genevieve Ashcroft, president's wife, best-dressed woman in Silver Creek, richest woman between Helena and Bozeman, put her face in her gloved hands and sobbed without sound. Then she lifted her head and she told Adelaide Thornberry, standing on the porch of a cabin that was now in Adelaide's name, what she had done. 8 years ago, she said, I loved Ezekiel Blackwood. I had loved him since we were 19. I asked him to marry me when I was 22, plainly because I am not a woman who is quiet, and he told me kindly that he was in love with a girl from Pennsylvania named Rosalind. He told me plainly, and he did not shame me. But I was shamed anyway. I was shamed because I had asked, and I never forgave him for it. She drew in a shaking breath. Cassius Crane came through Silver Creek in the winter of '76. He came to my husband's bank to exchange silver dust. I heard him ask where the Blackwood mine was. My husband did not know. I did. Rosalind had told me once kindly in church that Zeke's father had found a vein on the East Ridge. I told Cassius Crane. I thought he would ride up there and make Zeke an offer, and Zeke would take it and leave the mountain and be done with Rosalind and come to his senses. I did not know what Crane was. I did not know. I did not know. And when Rosalind died in the fire, I knew. And I said nothing. For 8 years I have said nothing. I have let the town say that Zeke burned his wife rather than say what I had done. She dropped to her knees in the snow beside the sleigh. I am the reason Rosalind Blackwood is dead, Miss Thornberry. I am the reason Cassius Crane is on this mountain tonight. I came here to warn them and to beg them for whatever it is worth to forgive me. I do not expect it. I expect to be shot. I will not run. Adelaide stood very still on the porch. The Winchester hung low in her hand. She looked down at Genevieve Ashcroft in the snow, and she thought of many things very quickly. She thought of the woman on the boardwalk in the yellow bonnet. She thought of the fox fur collar and the jet brooch. She thought of Zeke's hand on her head and his voice saying good. She thought of Rosalind Blackwood, whom she had never met, who had taught a shy grown man his letters at a kitchen table. And she thought last and clearest of 2 brothers riding at that moment toward Black Pine Pass without knowing how many men were coming against them or when. She set the Winchester down on the porch rail. She came down the steps, and she bent, and she took Genevieve Ashcroft by the arm and lifted her to her feet. Mrs. Ashcroft, she said, you will not die here today. You will come with me. You will saddle that spare horse in my barn, and you and I are going to ride to Black Pine Pass. Genevieve stared at her. You are going to save the men I love, Adelaide said, whether they forgive you or not. That is how you begin to earn a forgiveness. You do not ask for it. You ride. Cormac McCrae's boy came out onto the porch behind her rifle in hand. He looked at the 2 women in the yard. Ma'am, he said, if you ride, I ride too. You stay, Adelaide said. With Obie, you are his rifle now. Do not leave this cabin for any reason until one of the Blackwoods tells you to. Yes, ma'am. She turned to Genevieve. We have 40 minutes of daylight left in 3 miles of trail. Can you ride hard? I can ride hard, Miss Thornberry. Then saddle up and pray, madam. Pray like you have never prayed. They saddled up. They rode. And behind them in the cabin, Obadiah Blackwood turned his fevered face to the window and watched the 2 women go, and he whispered to no one who could hear him, God keep them. God keep all of them. The snow began again softly, a light steady fall. On the high ridge above Black Pine Pass, two brothers lay belly down in the rocks with their rifles laid across folded coats. Zeke on the left, Raph on the right, 100 feet of stone between them, each with a clean field of fire down into the cut. Obi could not ride, and Cormac could not rise from his bed. But two Blackwood rifles in the right rocks were worth a company of town men on open ground, and both brothers knew it. They waited for the riders coming up the trail, and a mile beyond the ridge, riding hard through the new snow, two women came on, one in a fur robe and one in a dark blue wool dress, their breath smoking white in the last light of the day, their hearts keeping time with the hoof beats of the horses beneath them. The powerful play was going on, and Adelaide Thornberry at last was contributing her verse. Black Pine Pass in winter was a narrow theoroid of rock between two granite shoulders of the mountain, the trail climbing up into it and narrowing to a place where two riders could not go abreast. Above the cut on both sides, the granite broke into a tumble of boulders a man could hide an army in if he had the army and the patience. Zeke Blackwood had been in those rocks since noon. Raph had been in them since an hour before noon. They had not spoken since they had chosen their positions. They did not need to. They had hunted elk in these rocks together for 30 winters. They knew without saying where the other's eye would go and where his rifle would point, and they knew that between the two of them, they could cover every inch of the cut from the lip to the floor. The riders came up the trail at twilight, 6 of them. Zeke counted them through the long brass spyglass. The lead rider was hunched, twisted on one side, moving badly in the saddle. The scar split the face in a way no other man in Montana wore a scar. Crane had come for this himself. He had not sent men to do it. He had come. Zeke closed the glass. He looked across the 100 feet of stone to Raph. Raph met his eyes and gave him the smallest nod a man can give and still be said to have nodded. Then Raph set his cheek to the stock of his Winchester and became still the way only Raph could become still, the stillness of a thing that has gone inside itself to wait. Zeke settled his own rifle across the folded coat and laid his finger along the guard and watched the 6 riders come on. He was thinking about Rosalind, not bitterly, not anymore. He was thinking about her the way a man thinks about a sister he has loved and buried. He was thinking, Rosalind, 8 years is a long time. You were not the kind of woman who would have wanted me to be 8 years alone. I am sorry I did not hear you sooner. And he was thinking about Adelaide, who had told him to come back. And he was thinking plainly that he meant to. Crane came up into the cut. Zeke let him come. Zeke let all 6 of them come, because in Black Pine Pass, the thing that mattered was position, and the position that mattered was the one where a rifle on the rim could put a bullet in a man's back if he tried to retreat. Zeke let them come until the last rider's horse stepped into the narrow, and the first rider's horse was halfway up the climb, and then the cut was a killing jar, and Zeke Blackwood raised his head above the rock, and he called down clear and loud in the voice of a man who had waited 8 years to say it. Cassius Crane. Crane jerked in the saddle. He looked up. Ezekiel, I told you once that if I found you again, I would finish what I started in Wyoming. You told me that while I was bleeding in the snow, Crane called back. I did not think you meant it. I meant it. Come down then, Blackwood. Come down off those rocks and do it clean. Man to man. No. Crane laughed. It was an ugly laugh, wet and broken. That is what I always liked about you, Ezekiel. You never did pretend to be brave when you could be smart. Zeke did not answer. He was watching Crane's hand. He was watching for the signal that would send the other 5 men for their rifles. He was watching because he had been a scout for the Union Army at 17 years old and had learned then that the man who fired first in a fight of this kind almost always lived, and the man who fired second almost never did. Crane's hand moved. Zeke fired. The first man, the one next to Crane, went off his horse. Raph fired a heartbeat later, and the rider at the rear went off his. The 4 men in between scattered some down off their horses, some into the rocks on the lower side of the cut, and for 20 seconds the pass filled with the sharp, flat cracks of rifle fire, and the screams of horses and the rattle of stones kicked loose and falling. When it was over, 3 of Crane's men were dead in the trail. 2 had gotten into the rocks on the downslope side below the brothers' position and were returning fire. Crane himself had gone off his horse at the first shot and had rolled into the shadow of a granite shoulder and was no longer in sight. Zeke worked the lever of his Winchester and found that Crane was where he had feared Crane would be. The one dead spot in the cut. The one angle neither brother could reach from his position on the rim. The shooting from below slowed. Raf Kula's Riverstone picked off one of the 2 downslope men with a single shot. The second returned fire twice more, then went quiet, playing possum, waiting. And then from the lower end of the cut below where the trail bent out of sight around the granite shoulder came the sound of hoofbeats. 2 horses, coming hard. Zeke felt it before he saw it. He felt the way a man feels a wrong note in a song. He shifted his rifle an inch. He was about to call to Raf when he heard the voice. A woman's voice, rising clear above the hoofbeats. "Zeke, behind you." It was Adelaide. Zeke turned his head and saw in the lower cut 2 riders coming up the trail at a gallop. A woman in a fur robe on a bay horse. A woman in a dark blue dress on a gray mare. Adelaide Thornberry riding into a gunfight with her hair half down and her eyes wild and a Winchester across her saddle. And he understood in the same instant what she was warning him about. Crane had not stayed in the dead spot. Crane had climbed. Crane had climbed up the backside of the granite shoulder, while Zeke's attention was on the men in the trail, and he was now above Zeke on the rim with a clear shot at Zeke's unprotected back. Zeke rolled onto his side as the shot cracked. He rolled because Adelaide's voice had bought him exactly 1 second, and 1 second was enough. The bullet that should have taken him between the shoulder blades took him instead high in the meat of the left shoulder, and it spun him hard against the stone, and he came up on one knee with his rifle already rising, and he saw Crane above him, 20 feet away, working the lever of his sharps for a second shot. Crane was smiling. Crane was smiling because this at last was the moment he had waited 8 years to have. And Rafferty Blackwood, 100 feet away on the other side of the cut, took the shot he had been born to take. 1 bullet, 52 grains of powder behind a 180 grain soft nose round from a Winchester 1873 lever, action in the hands of a man who had put a deer in the pot every week of his life since he was 9 years old across 100 feet of clean winter air. The bullet took Cassius Crane through the forehead just above the bridge of his nose, and it went out the back of his skull without asking his opinion on the matter, and he went down into the rocks without another sound. Below in the cut, the last man playing possum in the downslope rocks threw his rifle out into the open and stood up with his hands raised. The other 2 farther down the cut did the same. A handful of them left alive. None of them Crane. It was over. Zeke sat back against the cold stone with his left hand clamped over his right shoulder and the blood warm between his fingers. He watched Raf rise up out of his position on the rim, work the lever of his rifle once to chamber a fresh round in case one was needed, and then sling the rifle and start climbing down toward him. He watched Adelaide's gray mare come up the last of the trail into the cut, her rider's face white with terror and fury and relief all braided together. He watched her come. He watched her all the way. She threw herself off the horse before it had stopped, and she ran up over the rocks to where he sat, and she dropped to her knees in the snow beside him, and her hands went to his shoulder, and she said, "Zeke, Zeke, how bad?" "Not bad," he said. "Do not lie to me." "Della, through and through, high muscle, miss the bone. I have had worse." She put her forehead against his good shoulder, and she let out a sound that was part a laugh and part something else. Raf came up over the rocks with his rifle slung, and he looked at the 2 of them, and then down at Crane's body in its heap of granite, and a very small thing that was almost a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "Brother," Raf said, "little brother, I told you to come back alive. I am. You are bleeding. I am also bleeding." Raf knelt and looked at the wound and then at Adelaide. "Bind it tight. He will walk home." He stood. He looked down into the cut where the three surviving men stood with their hands up, and his amber eyes went cold the way only a Blackwood's eyes could go cold. "Tie them," he said to the nearest. "Tie each other, hands behind. We will walk you down to Silver Creek in the morning, and you will stand before the law there, and the law there is a Union man who remembers Missouri, bushwhackers by the names of the women they killed. I would run if I were you, but running into these woods in the dark with the wolves up is a choice, and I do not make it for you." None of the three men ran. They tied each other. Genevieve Ashcroft came up the last of the trail on her bay, breathing hard, and she sat her horse at the mouth of the cut, and she did not ride further up. She looked at Zeke sitting in the snow with his shoulder bound, and at Raph standing over Crane's dead face, and at Adelaide kneeling with her hands still bloody, and her own face was a thing that held every sin of the last 8 years at once. She did not speak. She did not ask forgiveness. She only sat her horse and waited to be told what to do. Adelaide looked up at her. "Mrs. Ashcroft," she said, "thank you for the ride." Genevieve nodded, once. She could not speak. Zeke, from his place in the snow, turned his head and looked at her for a long time. Then he said very quietly, so that only Adelaide and Raph could hear, "That woman rode with you up this mountain." "She did. She did not have to." "No." "Right," Zeke said. "All right then." That was all. It was enough. They walked down the mountain in the last blue light of the day. 3 prisoners first, then Raph riding drag with his rifle across his saddlebow, then Zeke and Adelaide on the gray mare together. Zeke's good arm around her waist, his bad shoulder wrapped tight with the blue wool Adelaide had bought at Peterson's Mercantile 6 weeks before. Genevieve Ashcroft rode a horse length back alone, and no one told her to come closer and no one told her to go. They made the McCrae place by full dark. Old Cormac was sitting up in bed, white as salt, and he took Zeke's good hand in both of his, and he said nothing, but his eyes said enough. Raph took the 3 prisoners on down to Silver Creek at first light. Dr. Holloway came up and dressed Zeke's shoulder properly. And Adelaide, for the first time in 3 days, slept without a rifle within arm's reach. When they rode into the Blackwood cabin the next afternoon, Obie was standing on the porch on a crutch. Cormac's boy had whittled for him, and he was weeping without shame. And Adelaide slid down off the gray mare and ran up the porch steps and held that quiet, gray-eyed middle brother for a long time without saying anything at all. Genevieve Ashcroft did not come up the mountain with them. She rode on back to Silver Creek alone in the gathering dusk, and the next morning she went to the office of Nathaniel Peterson, who was the only honest notary in that town, and she signed over the Silver Creek Bank, which had been her husband's and was now hers, to a board of trust she herself appointed. She kept nothing for herself but the house she lived in and a small pension. She used the proceeds of the bank to found a free school for the children of the miners and the homesteaders and the children of anyone else who could not pay, and she taught in that school reading and writing and arithmetic for the rest of her life. She never asked the Blackwood brothers for forgiveness. She never went up the mountain again uninvited. But every Christmas for the rest of her life, a wreath of blue mountain spruce appeared on the porch of the Blackwood cabin, and every Easter a basket of fresh bread, and every year on the anniversary of Rosalind Blackwood's death, a small bouquet of dried wildflowers appeared on Rosalind's grave, which was on the hill behind the cabin, and no one ever said who had brought them because no one ever needed to. They were married in the first week of December, with the snow heavy on the pines and the cabin full of the few neighbors that country had. The Reverend Elijah Whitmore rode up from Silver Creek to perform the service. Cormac McCrae stood as witness for Zeke, his chest still bandaged under his Sunday coat. Nathaniel Peterson stood as witness for Adelaide because she had no family left in the world, and Peterson had been the first man in that town to call her ma'am and mean it. Obie played the harmonica. He played Shenandoah the way their mother had taught him when he was 8 years old. He played it slow and sweet, and once in a while his eyes closed, and he was not in that cabin at all, but somewhere back where their mother still lived, and all 3 Blackwood brothers heard that, and none of them said anything about it, and the song was better for it. Raph stood beside his oldest brother as best man. He did not smile during the service. Raph did not smile in public. But when Zeke took Adelaide's hand and turned to speak his vow, Raph put a hand on his brother's back just for a moment, just enough to say yes, just enough to say, I am here, just enough to say, I will stand with you. Zeke took Adelaide's hand. He had thought the week before about what he would say. He was not a man of many words, and he had been afraid he would not find the right ones. But when he opened his mouth, the words were there, the way the words are for a man who has waited long enough to say them. Adelaide Thornberry, he said, 8 years ago I buried Rosalind, and I told God I was finished. I meant it then. I was wrong. I was wrong because I did not know you were coming. I did not know a woman could step down off a stagecoach in October and walk 6 miles into a blizzard rather than turn back. I did not know a woman could stand in a mercantile and speak for a man she had known 12 days when the whole town would not. I did not know a woman could shoot a man off a sleigh to save my brother and then nurse him through the fever and call me back from a mountain I had no business coming back from. I did not know, and now I know. And I am not the man I was 8 years ago. I am a man who has been given one more chance than any man has a right to. I cannot give you smooth words, and I cannot give you a city life. I can give you this mountain, and this cabin, and my name, and every day I have left. And I swear to you before these men and before God that I will not waste a single one of them. Adelaide's eyes were full. She did not wipe them. Ezekiel Blackwood, she said. I came to Montana to marry a stranger. I found 3. I found a brother who called me Della the first time I could make him laugh. I found a brother who left a sprig of blue spruce on my table because he did not know how else to ask me to stay. And I found you. I found a man who cupped warm water over my frozen feet for an hour without saying a word, and who signed his land over to my name before he knew if I would keep it, and who rode into a fight he had every reason not to win because he had given his word he would come back. I did not know men like you existed. I know now. I take you. I take all of you. And I thank God for a letter that lost in a town that would not give me a wagon, because if either of those things had been otherwise, I would not be standing in this cabin tonight. The Reverend Whitmore cleared his throat. He was not a man easily moved, but he was moved. By the authority vested in me by the territory of Montana and the Almighty God, he said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Blackwood, you may kiss your bride. Zeke did. It was not a long kiss. It was not an elaborate kiss. It was the kind of kiss a man gives a woman when he has been carrying a weight for 8 years and has finally set it down. Obie played a reel then, and Cormac McCrae and his boy clapped their hands, and even Raph cracked something that might have passed for a smile, and Nathaniel Peterson produced a stone jug of cider from the sleigh outside, and for the first time in 8 years, the Blackwood cabin knew what a wedding sounded like. Later that night, when the fire was banked and the guests gone to their beds in the barn loft, Zeke took Adelaide up the stairs to the room that had been hers alone, and that was not hers alone anymore. He paused at the door. He looked down at her. Mrs. Blackwood, he said. Mr. Blackwood. The door closed softly behind them. Outside, the snow kept falling across the Montana territory, soft and patient, the way it had been falling on the night he had first carried her out of it. By morning, it had covered every track of the old life of that cabin, and it was making room in its quiet way for every track of the new. The seasons came. Spring broke the ice on the creek in late April. Adelaide stood in the thaw mud of the yard one morning in her new boots, the good ones Zeke had ordered up from Helena, and she watched the water run black and hard over the stones, and she thought, I have lived here half a year. She thought, I am not the woman who stepped down off that stagecoach. She thought, I do not know who I am now, but I like her. That summer, Jasper Cormac Blackwood, was born on a clear July morning, with the sound of meadowlarks coming in the open window. Zeke held his son for the first time with hands that shook the way they had not shaken on the ridge above Black Pine Pass, and he cried without shame, and Adelaide watched him hold the baby and thought, yes, I would cross that country again, and worse for this moment. Obie carved a cradle of peeled pine the shape of a small boat, with a running mare carved into the footboard, and Jasper slept in it until he was too big to fit. Raph rode down to Silver Creek that fall, and came back with a woman named Esme Fletcher, Dr. Holloway's daughter, who had been 19 and quiet and reading a book on the front porch of the doctor's house when Raph had delivered her father home after a house call. Esme had looked up from the book and said, "You are Rafferty Blackwood." And Raph had said, Raph and Esme had said Rafferty suits you better. And that was how Raph's mother's name came back into his life after 20 years. They were married in the spring of '87. They built a cabin a mile east of Zeke in Adelaide because Raph was a man who needed his own sky, and Esme understood him the way only one other woman in the world had ever understood him, and that woman was dead a long time. Obi took longer. Obi took until the summer of '89 when a young widow named Lorna Hadley came into Silver Creek from Denver with a 5-year-old daughter named Pearl and no money and no prospects. Lorna had inherited a little land from her first husband, a good man who had died of the influenza in '88, but the land had been sold to pay the debts, and Lorna had come up to Silver Creek because an aunt of hers lived there. The aunt died 2 months after Lorna arrived, leaving Lorna stranded again, and Obi met her at the Mercantile one morning when he had ridden down for nails and lamp oil. Lorna was trying to buy a half-pound of coffee and 12 cents short of the price. Obi paid the 12 cents without her asking, and when she tried to thank him, he said, "Only, ma'am, a Blackwood cannot stand by and watch a lady go short on coffee. It is against our religion." Lorna laughed. She had not laughed in 6 months. Obi brought her and Pearl up the mountain for Sunday dinner. He did it 3 Sundays in a row. On the 4th Sunday, he asked her to marry him on the front porch of the cabin he had built for himself on the West Flat, the cabin he had been slowly building for 3 years without being able to say to anyone, including himself, what he had been building it for. Lorna said yes. Obi raised Pearl as his own, and no one in Montana Territory ever heard Obadiah Blackwood raise his voice to that child, not once in the 30 years that followed. Rosalind Genevieve Blackwood was born in December of 1890 on a night when the wind was coming off the north so hard that Zeke had to go out to the barn 3 times to keep the animals from panicking. Adelaide labored for 11 hours with Lorna Blackwood and Esme Blackwood by her side, and when she at last put the small, dark-haired daughter in Zeke's arms and said her name is Rosalind Genevieve, Zeke did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "Della, yes, thank you." He did not say for what. He did not need to. Old Cormac McCrae died in the February of '91 of the pneumonia. He was 72. He had been a union man at Antietam and a homesteader for 30 years, and a friend to the Blackwood brothers from the first year they had come back from burying their mother. Zeke and Raph and Obi dug his grave themselves on a high place that looked out over the valley, because the ground in February is iron, and they would not ask any other man to do that work for them. Cormac's boy, now grown and a rancher in his own right, stood at the graveside and shook each brother's hand and said, "Only Pa thought of you 3 like sons. I thought you ought to know." Raph's oldest boy, born in '92, was named Cormac. Obi's first son with Lorna, born in '94, was named Cormac. Zeke and Adelaide's third child, born in the April of '93, a boy, was named Silas Cormac Blackwood, and Zeke explained to Adelaide one night by the fire why he had chosen that first name. "Silas," he said, "it is a Hebrew name. It means of the forest. It also means, in some tellings, a man asked for. I spent 8 years hating a man with a name very close to that one. I will not spend the rest of my life letting him keep a name I like. This boy will be Silas Cormac, and he will grow up in the forest, and he will be a man asked for, and the name will be his and not that other man's, and the other man can rot." Adelaide put her hand on his knee. "He will be Silas Cormac Blackwood," she said. He was. And he was a thoughtful boy, the quietest of the 3 children, a boy who grew up reading his father's Whitman by Firelight and wanting to know how things worked. He was the one who went east when the time came. He took the stagecoach down to Silver Creek and the train out to Bozeman at 17 with his father's blessing and his mother's tears, and he took a degree in agriculture at Montana Agricultural College up in Bozeman, and he came home every summer to work the ranch, and he wrote long letters from college to his mother that she kept tied with string in the cedar chest at the foot of her bed for the rest of her days. By 1895, the Blackwood Ranch had grown to 500 acres of good grass and pine, 200 head of cattle, 50 horses, 3 cabins inside a 3-mile radius, and a reputation in Silver Creek that had long since swallowed the old stories. No one in that town now spoke of Rosalind Blackwood's death as anything but what it was, which was the crime of Cassius Crane, and no one in that town now spoke of the Blackwood brothers with anything but the respect that is paid to men who have built a thing out of hard country and not sold it back. The years came. They came the way the years come, in cords of split wood stacked higher each October, in children growing too fast, too tall, too soon, in Adelaide's hair going one winter at a time from honey gold to a sort of wheat streaked with silver, and then to more silver than wheat, and then to silver that still carried a trace of gold in it at certain angles, the way old gold coins carry their brightness even through the patina of decades. Zeke's beard went white before the rest of him. He had always been a man whose face showed the weather before the rest of him did. Obie walked with a slight favor in the leg that had taken the bullet on the sleigh forever after. Not a limp, a favor. He said he had earned it and he would not trade it. Lorna said she liked the way it made him lean to one side when he was thinking hard. Raph was the first of the 3 brothers to stop walking the perimeter of the clearing at night. He did it because Esme asked him to. She said, "Rafferty, the mountain is not going anywhere, and neither am I. But if you keep going out in the cold at midnight, you will give yourself a hitch in your back that neither of us will want to live with." Raph considered that. Then he stopped. He replaced it with walking the perimeter of the clearing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon instead, with Esme on his arm, which was not the same thing and was better. Jasper married a schoolteacher from Bozeman in 1905. He took over the day running of the ranch and built a larger house on the South Flat for his family. Rosalind Genevieve, the dark-haired one, went to the same college her brother had gone to and came home and taught in the same free school Genevieve Ashcroft had founded in Silver Creek 30 years before. She taught there for 40 years. 2 generations of miners and homesteaders' children learned their letters from the daughter of a mail-order bride, and none of them ever knew that because she did not make a show of where she had come from. Silas Cormack, the thoughtful one, came back from college and married the preacher's daughter, a tall, quiet young woman named Ruth, and he built a house on the ridge above the old one and kept the books for the whole Blackwood operation with the careful hand he had learned, he said, from watching his mother keep the trap-lined ledger by lamplight when he was small. 6 grandchildren by the autumn of 1914. 6 grandchildren chasing each other down to the creek on a warm September afternoon through the long grass of an alpine meadow speckled with fireweed and asters, their laughter carrying up to the porch of the old cabin where 2 old people sat in hickory chairs and watched. Adelaide Blackwood was 53 that autumn. Zeke was 68. The old cabin had been added on to twice. A second story added in 86, a wing put on in 90. The stone fireplace that had always been the heart of the place still held, though the chimney had been rebuilt once by Jasper and his uncle Obie. In the summer, Jasper was 15, because a stone fireplace, Obie had told the boy, is like a marriage. You have to take it apart every 20 years or so and put it back together better than you found it. Obie was 64 that autumn. He still played the harmonica. He played it softer now because his breath was not what it had been, but he played it still. Down at his own cabin, just visible through the pines, smoke rose from the chimney where Lorna had supper going. Pearl Blackwood Hadley. Obie's stepdaughter was 30 years old now, and the wife of a lawyer in Helena, and she wrote her parents every week. Raph was 60. His amber hair had gone white at the temples and iron gray everywhere else. He had shot a bear in the summer, a big male that had come down for the sheep with the same Winchester he had used at Black Pine Pass, and he had brought the hide down to the old cabin and laid it in front of the fireplace, and he had said only figured the old one was getting thin. Esme, his wife of 27 years, had given him a look that said more than a paragraph, and he had laughed. The 6 grandchildren ran down to the creek, and Adelaide watched them go, and she thought, as she had thought every autumn for 20 years, that this was the hour of the year she liked best. The hour when the light went gold and the mountain air smelled of cured grass and drying pine, and the children were too far off to need anything, and Zeke was beside her in his chair, and the day was not yet over, but was beginning in its quiet way to bow toward its own ending. Zeke, she said. Della, do you remember the night you carried me in from the snow? He turned his head. His amber eyes had faded only a little. Every night, he said, every night of my life. She reached out and took his hand. His hand was large, still scarred across the knuckles, still warm. I came up this mountain thinking I was going to die, she said. I know. I did not die. No. Do you know what I think, Zeke? I think the woman who knelt in that snow did die that night. I think someone else got up. I think you carried a different woman home in that bear coat than the one who fell. I have been trying for 30 years to thank you for that, and I have not found the words. Zeke was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Della, I carried you home, but I did not make you get up off the snow. You did that. The woman you were and the woman you are, that is one woman. You just had to walk a long way to find out it was true. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I love you, Ezekiel Blackwood. I love you, Della. Down at the creek, the youngest grandchild, a curly-haired boy of 4 called Thomas, tripped over a stone and fell in up to his knees, and his older sister, Jasper's girl, Harriet, pulled him out, with much theatrical complaining about how she always had to be the one. And the boy laughed, and all 6 children shrieked with the laughter of children who know nothing yet of cold and loss and waiting. Adelaide smiled. 30 years, she said. You know, when you wrote me that letter in Harper's Weekly, I did not believe there was such a man in the world. I thought it was a trap. It was, Zeke said, just not the kind you thought. She laughed and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. He smelled still of pine smoke and gun oil, though he had not needed a gun for many years. From down at Obie's place, a few bars of harmonica lifted on the evening air. Home on the Range. Obie always played that one in the autumn. Adelaide closed her eyes. She thought one more time of the girl kneeling in the October snow, 3 decades before believing with a dim animal certainty that she was going to die alone in country she did not know. She thought of the 3 riders coming out of the pines. She thought of the amber eyes and the bear coat and the arm that had come around her like a gate closing. The letter lied, she whispered almost too softly for Zeke to hear. I am still sorry for that, he said, because he always said it. Do not be, the letter lied, but the man who wrote it did not. That is the difference. He pulled her close against his side. The sun went down behind the western ridge. The mountain turned blue and then purple and then the color of old silver. The harmonica stopped. The children came back up from the creek in a damp, laughing tangle and went through the cabin door and into supper. Someone called Grandma Grandpa come eat. Jasper's voice, a grown man's voice in the house of a boy who had slept in a pine cradle with a running mare carved into the footboard 30 years before. Zeke stood first. He offered her his hand. Mrs. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood. She took his hand, and she rose, and together they went inside out of the last of the autumn light into the warm yellow light of a cabin full of family. The cabin that had been built by hard hands on hard ground and had in the end held. Behind them on the empty porch, the 2 hickory chairs sat side by side a little closer together than they had been at the start of the day, because that was the way of chairs in a long marriage. And behind the cabin on the hill above the creek, a small stone marker stood between 2 others. Rosalind Blackwood, 1851 to 1876. Cormac McCrae, 1819 to 1891. And one day, though not yet, 2 more stones would go there side by side, carved by Jasper and Silas Cormac in the clean, careful lettering their father had taught them. But that was a long way off still, and on that September evening in 1914, the light inside the cabin was warm, and the voices were many, and the powerful play was going on. And Adelaide Blackwood, who had once been Adelaide Thornberry of Philadelphia, who had come up that mountain with nothing but a valise and a lie, had long since, without ever meaning to and without ever stopping, contributed her verse.